Welcome everyone to episode 11 of the Inclusion Conversation. So for those who don't know, the Inclusion Conversation is a monthly talk show where we talk about everything to do with diversity and inclusion, and we learn together about different topics. And the idea really is to break down borders and bring the world closer together, one conversation at a time. My name is Solène. I'm the host of the Inclusion Conversation. I'm also the founder of Be Beyond Borders, and I'm really happy to be here with you today and with Mark, who's joining us to talk about life beyond a suicide loss. So, as most of you know, because I think most of you have attended previous events, we are having two parts to this hour. The first part is really about asking questions to Mark, our guest speaker, and learning from him, and that's recorded and then shared on YouTube. And the second part is really about anyone in this virtual room joining live, asking questions, sharing their own experiences with the topic as well. So please feel free, especially in that second part, to turn on your camera and share with us. If you're watching the recording, you're only getting the first part. So next time, join us live. A little bit about the etiquette for this hour. Again, those of you who have joined before, you will know about this, but cameras on if you're open to it, so we can see your lovely faces. I can see Alison and Ian, for example. Hi. There are closed captions enabled, so if you want to see that, do feel free to request it and I can pop that on. Use the chat to say hello. I see a few people have already used the chat, saying hello from different parts where you're joining from. Any questions as well, feel free to pop in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing that. In terms of mindset, it's all about the open mindset to learn, including diversity. There are a lot of topics that can be very sensitive, very personal, and especially the topic we're talking about today can be triggering, and we do recognize that. So if you feel like you need to step out at any point and come back in, or catch up on the recording or pause the recording if you're watching the recording, absolutely do that. There are no scheduled breaks, so if you need one, just take one. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome Mark. You have definitely longer hair than on your LinkedIn photo that I grabbed on here. It's really so good to see you and to have you with us. So welcome, Mark, and please do tell us a little bit more about you.
Thank you very much, Solène. It's great to be here. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. You're right. Yeah, that photo was taken pre-pandemic. And I just had another one taken, so I should probably update that. But yeah, it has grown a bit since then. Yeah, but great to be here. A little bit about me. So I'm a coach. I coach in different ways. My principal coaching role is with an amazing business called Multiverse, in whose offices I'm sitting. Jazzy arrows to my right, that's all Multiverse branding, and I am humbled and honoured to be the coach to some amazing apprentices who are embarking on business journeys and life journeys, and that takes up pretty much most of my time. And I've just hot-footed it from my team, get together with my colleagues. We've been making pizza, so I've probably got, and I've been eating more than I've been making, so I've probably got bits of pizza in my teeth and flour all over me. And then switch the camera on. So and then I also coach people outside of that. I'm always coaching people in some shape or form. And what else to know? I'm mildly obsessed with fitness. Love running. Running is running is kind of my therapy in a way. It's my therapy. It's very important for me, and fitness. I've got 4 amazing children, beautiful wife, Verena, who are very important for me, and probably as much as you need to know at this stage. But yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for the little stop tour around your life. I didn't realize you had 4 kids. I thought it was 2, so I don't know, I lost count somewhere. So we're here to talk about a topic that is considered taboo by many people around the world, culturally, personally, and that's suicide. So tell us a bit, how did suicide come into your life?
Suicide came into my life in 2016, July the 6th, 2016 to be specific. It's a date that is anyone that's experienced suicide in their family. It's like a moment you'll never forget. And I kind of, in some ways, see my life in kind of two parts. Like it's like BC, AD, really. I was living what some people would call a sort of stereotypical sort of life in terms of, you know, chasing the dream, as you might call it. I had a, you know, successful, inverted commas, job. I was looking to sort of make my way in the world and provide for my family and my future. I was busy with that. 4 amazing children, beautiful family, and my kind of, you know, things after working sort of, you know, like a lot of people, very hard over a number of years, had started to realize some success with that in my career. And I was in a fast-moving sort of commercial role. I was spending a lot of time on the phone. And then one day, I took a phone call very early in the morning to inform me that my eldest son, Charlie, had taken his own life. He was 18 years old. He just finished his A-levels. He was about to go to university, and this came like a bolt out of the blue. This was not expect. He'd had some wobbles. Many teenagers have wobbles, but he didn't have, you know, what you might call a sort of classic history of, you know, what these days we would call mental health problems on a record. I think he had 1 doctor's appointment for earache, you know, something like, you know. So this was a complete shock. And, you know, that was the moment that my life was forever changed. And it really, so as I say, that was, you know, that was the day, that was the event. And so I said at the beginning of the podcast, I had 4 children, you know, and I always include Charlie in that. So I always say to people, I have 4 children. And if I'm asked further, I lost 1, but he's still, you know, he's still with me. So I always regard it as 4, and he was my eldest. I've got 3 other children.
Well, thank you for sharing. Makes me really emotional. So I'm probably not going to be the perfect host from here. Forgive me, everyone.
It's an emotional subject.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is like a punch in the gut. I can't imagine, you know, being in the story rather than hearing the story, if that makes sense. Today we're talking about life beyond. That was the kind of the topic, and that's what also you call your project that you're working on. What's life beyond like? Because you said there's AD, BC.
Yeah, that's my kind of interpretation of it. It's a funny thing with that, because it comes up in the moments, it catches you out in moments where you least expect it. It can be very innocent in where somebody say, "Oh, do you remember that concert?" Or "Do you remember that kind of time we went to France camping?" Was that 2014, wasn't it? Was that 2006? And I know exactly. Because it's like, oh, Charlie was there. So I know, or he wasn't there. So things like that make it very, you know, very definitive. What's it like? I think it's, look, I can only speak, and I will only speak from my own personal experience, because you know, we're all unique individuals. So my experience will be different from somebody else's. Life is different. And I think the biggest, to try and, you know, I'm mindful of the time we have, and, you know, to say it was, you know, a shock is an understatement. So I was in complete shock for a while, and the immediate aftermath of losing Charlie and the the funeral and that time it's a blur. Some of that's a blur now, and yet some amazing things happened, and we came together and we organised this thing, and some of this is going to sound maybe unusual for people because it's a very suicide's an emotive subject. It can be a dark subject. It's a very heavy subject, but some incredible things have happened as a result of losing Charlie. And I always say, look, I'd have him back in a heartbeat. And yet, what I've had to do in a word is reframe everything, reframe life. So the single biggest shift that occurred for me was a change of purpose in my life. So I talked earlier about I was in business, I was doing my thing, I was on this sort of kind of life pathway mission, and I've got a lot of affection for old me. I look at that person almost like another person. Like he was doing his best. He was a bit misguided at times, but he had good intent. That guy, Mark Pitcher, pre 2016. But losing Charlie just brought everything into life into sharp focus, and it just made me, in some ways, the blessing he brought and so many gifts he's given me. For some people, finding meaning in life can be a very drawn out, protracted and uncomfortable and painful process. And I'm still on a journey with it. And yet it brought a lot of things into sharp focus very immediately. So I made some decisions. You're given all sorts of advice when this sort of thing, people say, don't make any big decisions, you need time. And there's a lot in that. I kind of went with some of that, but against some of it, and I quit my job and I launched my own business. I set myself up as a coach. I completely sort of retrained and followed my passion, and it led me to some very interesting places, some of it successful, some of it less successful, but a shift in purpose and the ability to reframe and somehow find the positive in something so awful and tragic as it is, and it always will be. And often, but I find myself sometimes in situations where I'm asked about it, a little bit like today. It's like it's not about moving on. You don't really move on. Well, I certainly don't from something like this, but you can move forward, and there's a difference. Because moving on, to me, intimates that you're kind of over it somehow. Oh, it's better now. Someone asked me, innocently, and I think well-meaningly at one point, said, "Oh, you're feeling better now about everything. You feel you've moved on. And it was just a strange concept to me, and I don't want to move on from it. I carry it with me. Some days it's heavier, some days it's lighter. But I can use it, and then it becomes about how am I going to use this? How am I going to use this thing, this grief, this pain to help contribute something positive to the world in some way, but at the same time making sure I look after myself without losing myself. So I don't know if that makes how any of that sounds, but or makes any sense, but that was the sort of the main things that are sort of changed, if you like.
Yes, a drastic change. And you've mentioned finding purpose and meaning. You've mentioned at the real beginning about the importance of sports and looking after yourself, and then you also mentioned contributing to the world. Sounds like these things have been part of the grieving process. What else maybe helped? Just time or other things that, if people find themselves in a similar situation?
Yeah, look, it's such an individual experience. And, look, I've been to in the last few years, I found myself in different situations. I went to there's an amazing support group specifically for those who are bereaved by suicide. You know, like, who knew? I've spoken to other people who've been bereaved by suicide. I've spoken to people that have experienced other forms of grief that are not suicide. You know, it's such a unique. I would not even, you know, you could sit somebody next to me right now who lost their son to suicide at 18, and that we, you know, would have this thing in common, and yet our experience would be different. Maybe the background was different. So I would never ever be so audacious as to kind of try and deliver somebody a script or say, hey, this is the way, you know, far from it. I did have this idea at one time that I was going to set up this kind of program for people who've been bereaved by suicide and show them the way and help you. But then I, you know, had to stop and think, well, who am I to do that, really? I mean, it's such an individual. But there are things that help, and I think it's, so rather than be it for me to say, do this, it's more a case of find something. That's why I come back to these sort of quite foundational sort of pillars, like find purpose, find a purpose, find a meaning if you can. And I say that without judgment. I mean, look, I would understand, you know, some people find alcohol or drugs or they can't go on, and I wouldn't judge them for that. I've had a little glimpse under that doorway. It's a dark place, and I would not judge. This is excuse my language, Selene, but this is, you know, heavy shit, and I wouldn't judge anybody. But if you can find it within you to find some positive, however small, some spark of something positive that you can take from your pain and situation to use, and give it some, and attach some meaning to that, and that can give you a reason to go forward. And it could be for you or for somebody else. I found coaching helped me a lot. So that sort of you know, the feeling of helping others, seeing other people do things in Charlie's name, and I now have new friends. I've had some of Charlie's friends are now my friends, and they joke that I'm their oldest mate, you know, and I could tell you stories that I would not finish in this podcast because I can feel it now because I'm thinking of them, that would make me incredibly emotional. And people have done and said things, because, you know, it's powerful stuff, this. But I always then go to, maybe it's the coach in me. Okay, I've got this emotion. How can I use it? How can I channel that? And then I try and make sure I put myself at the center of whatever I'm doing in a way that I'm looking after myself. I didn't initially. Initially I went on a bit of a crusade to sort of, I wanted to coach the world, you know. I thought, thinking I wanted to be the next Tony Robbins and do all this amazing stuff. And I created a lot of positive waves, and there was a lot of good stuff that happened. But I was almost doing it at my own expense, and I realised I had to look after myself. And so I mean, be kind to yourself has become a little bit of a sort of a hashtag these days. It gets bandied around a lot, but I had to really take that seriously. And I give myself a monthly treat now, whether it's a massage or reflexology or Reiki or you know, whatever I feel like doing, to make sure and just check in with myself and surrounding myself with. So that's the other thing I'd say. Surround yourself with people who have good intent and have got your best interests at heart, because it's also, you can be incredibly vulnerable, and I was much more vulnerable than I thought, and it's easy to attach yourself to things and people. You've got to make sure that their intentions are good, so you don't, you know, lose yourself in it. But yeah.
Yeah, that's really valuable, I think, especially the part where you're saying you can't pour from an empty cup in a different way. Like be kind to yourself and find ways to create that grounding and that foundation, which must be unbelievably difficult, because I can only imagine opening the laptop and being like, what's the meaning of this? You know, back to the day job the week after, 3 weeks after, whatever it is, how to even find that meaning and that connection. And you know, from your story, like that shift of then, well, let's find something that has more meaning, because it doesn't feel right anymore. You need to go in to be able to sense that it doesn't feel right. If you're still out there, you're not able necessarily to find that grounding. So does that resonate? Does that?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I remember sitting in an out. Yeah, I'm going to name check a few people who were amazing, and there's too many to mention. But at the time, I was working for a business, and my CEO is a guy called Ben Hood, who may or may not hear this, and he was incredible. I mean, it was. He just said to me, you know, we love you. Take as long as you need, and we'll be here. I mean, to have that pressure removed. And because you hear horror stories about people going, yeah, sorry about that. When you're coming back, and I needed that time. And I'll be forever grateful to him for that. I remember in that period sitting in an outdoor cafe, staring and into space and watching people going in and out of Starbucks and ordering and checking Instagram and it was almost, I had this like, how dare they just go and order lattes and be frivolous and complain about Instagram. Charlie's died. Doesn't everyone realise that the world's changed and you realise nobody cares. The world carries on. So you're left with yourself. It's the Viktor Frankl kind of moment where you kind of go, I need to figure out a way through this myself, because no one really is going to help me. I mean, on the one hand, of course, you've got loved ones who care for you and want to do it, but you have to somehow, if you can, find the mental and emotional strength. And if you can't do it on your own, find people who can help you. Really, I'd say that. I respect the hell out of counsellors and whatever it takes. I personally haven't gone that route per se. I have, and that's not to say I won't, because I may well do. But making sure that you've got access to things or people if you need it. But and it's going to be a journey, and it catches you out with stuff. It kind of I'm sitting here with you saying, because it's been for me, it's been over 6 years now, and it can catch you out. The fourth year was tougher than the second year. Fourth anniversary for me was one of the hardest, and it's this stuff can just catch you out like that when you least expect it. So yeah, but this for me is part of it. It's part of the process. Coming on here talking about it, and if somebody listening to this had no awareness, but now they have some awareness of what it must be like for someone who's been amazing, or if there is somebody here that's has been touched by it and one tiny thing helps them, then amazing. That's what it's about, really.
Yes, definitely. And thinking about people watching this and thinking back to what the CEO, the very powerful thing that the CEO told you at the time. What are some of these kind of really do's and don'ts? It's very hard to support someone that, is going through a similar experience to what you went through. So and I know you don't want to give advice because you're a coach, I know that, but any kind of big headlines, like, please don't say that. Like you said at the beginning, right? Don't try not to ask, have you moved on? Because you don't move on. So things like that.
Yeah, what I said was I was asked it. Look, I believe most people come with good intent. Most things like this, people often either don't know what to say, But sometimes what I say about suicide is this: before it happens, if you talk about prevention, I mean, we can go online now, we can go on to most social media platforms. There's a ton of stuff about mental health and suicide prevention, and fantastic. You know, a rising tide floats all boats, and the more the better. Everyone wants to talk about that, but until it happens, then no one wants to talk about it. And it's radio silence, and it can be a very lonely place. I would never. I know other people who have had a bereavement the same as mine, who can get quite cross and this do's and don'ts and get offended by things. I honestly think that most people come with good intent. Some people may innocuously, or unwittingly say something that might trigger you, so I guess the simplest answer I'd give to that would be just ask. Just ask. Is it something you want to talk about? You're happy to talk about? Try to mention them by name. Actually, probably the single biggest thing I would say, and I've found pretty much unanimous agreement to this wherever most people I've spoken to being bereaved by suicide, is mention their name. It doesn't have to be a taboo. Maybe ask first. Maybe say, is it okay? Are you happy to talk about it? And if you get permission, then you're on sort of safe ground. I could talk about Charlie all day. I really could talk about Charlie. So what I've noticed is the difference between suicide bereavement and what I might call, if I can call it, natural bereavement, is that people don't tend to mention the person unless you do. So if I volunteer the subject or Charlie as a topic, people might react, but people don't tend to go, I remember when Charlie did this, probably for fear of that, I might trigger him, or I want to mention that, let's talk about something positive. So the inference is that by saying that's negative. It doesn't have to be negative, it could be beautiful. And I appreciate there's a bravery to that, but if you're not sure, just ask. This might be a very crude analogy. Maybe if you're not sure if someone's pregnant or not, or there's a subject that you might want to avoid, then maybe someone's got a terminal illness. Do you want to talk about it? No, I don't. Okay, fine, then we'll talk about it. Yeah, actually, I do. And sometimes talking about it can be very cathartic for that person. I mean, probably the only really big, obvious one, which I've only had twice, is why? Why did they do it?
Twice too many.
Yeah, again, not said with any malice, and it was like, I think they were verbalizing, they were thinking out loud what everyone's probably thinking. And if I knew the answer to that, that's the stuff I'll go to my grave with. Why Charlie? Why us? Why? That's probably a slightly blunt question to ask, is a little bit, but most people don't do that, and it's just, I would just say, just ask. And not be afraid to, my own experience of this is in my own family. So I lost a son, but my other sons lost a brother, and Charlie's mum lost a son, and my father lost a grandson, and so on. So everyone had their own relationship with Charlie, and everyone has their own experience. So sometimes, and it's a bit like, I grew up in the 80s, so forgive the analogy, but if you remember those little stereos people used to buy at home in the 80s, they had these little things called graphic equalizers, where the lights would jump up and down to the music, like the bass and the treble. And they were never still, they were always jumping up and down. And I see grief like that a little bit, or certainly in our family, like, somebody's up, but somebody's down at the same time. Someone's having a good day, but someone else said. So sometimes this, not trying to fix it all, not trying to come with an answer or a fix, but just sitting in that quiet, dark, heavy place with them and going, yeah, that's a tough one. That must be really tough. and just holding the moment and not trying to kind of go, oh, never mind, let's all go and get an ice cream. You know, because it's okay. It's okay to sit there because it is and it is tragic and it always will be. So let's almost acknowledge that, and then there will be a moment where we go and get the ice cream. But it doesn't have to be immediate. So it's almost, you know, honoring what's there. Yeah.
Not putting carpets over the discomfort or emotion. Yeah.
And it's incredibly empowering thing, an empathetic thing to do for someone, just to hold that moment with them and say, and sometimes it's instinctive. You might just think there's nothing to say here, and you just hold the silence, or you hold, and sometimes it's not verbal. You know, everyone's different. I remember going to watch my one of my other sons play a football match not long after Charlie died, and I hadn't seen the other parents since Charlie died, and you know, they knew, and I knew that they knew, and they knew that I knew that they knew, and I think nobody really wanted to say anything. And one of the guys comes up, just gives me a little tap on the arm and goes, "Good to see you back, Mark." Give me a little squeeze on the arm. You know, get emotional. So I can get emotional. That was like, you know, 6 years ago. That is a moment. That's an acknowledgement of like, I'm acknowledging your grief, and it's good to see you. Could be something really simple, you know, whatever you think is appropriate.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you.
Or maybe even I don't know what to say, so I bought you an ice cream. You know, who knows?
I'm noting the ice cream point, so next time we meet,
I don't know where ice creams come
buy
from.
you an ice cream.
Yeah, a bit of ice cream thing.
What about if we turn it, and I'll end on this question, and then we'll open for the floor for questions from everyone. What about if we turn it on the flip side, and we have someone who is perhaps in the place that Charlie was in, considering suicide as maybe their only option? Is there anything that, you know, any message that you'd want to share with them?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny you asked me that. And I respect the question. Interestingly, since Charlie died, I've had several instances of people coming to me with someone they know, child in the family, or just a friend that they know who's struggling with this stuff and they're worried about. And they're coming to me for advice and saying, "Hey, I think you'd be a really good person for them to talk to, and you know, what would you say?" And actually, I find it quite interesting because I don't know any more than anybody else. I'm on the other side of it, so I'm not, you know, qualified in any way to sort of speak to someone who is in that place. I'm incredibly mindful of it, and I'm watching my, you know, but my single biggest fear in life, bar none, is that heaven forbid, any of my other children should contemplate something similar. So I'm very watchful and very much more tuned in to the behaviours and moods and things like that than I probably was before. And I've read a lot. And now I read about some of the things that Charlie used to say, and I think, oh, look, that was a sign, you know. And I've got some theories on, you know, what he might have been suffering with, but they're theories and hunches. To answer your question, you know, so I'd answer it in two ways. Number one, I would point them respectfully to, depending on the age of a person, if we're talking about a young person under the age of 35, I would point them to an amazing organization called Papyrus. They've got something called Hopeline, and maybe we can share the number for that actually. But Hopeline is their telephone line for anyone that's struggling. They are trained Papyrus is set up for the prevention of suicide in young people specifically. It's only a very small charity. Some of people might have recently seen some guys in the news called Three Dads Walking, these three guys who lost daughters to suicide who came together and they're doing big charity walks, and it's amazing stuff. And they're I say they're affiliated, they do a lot for Papyrus. It's something that's, you know, they're important in my life in terms of what they do, and I would point them there to a professional. In terms of, but I'm not really any more qualified than anybody else here really to help in that. And you know, I guess where since losing Charlie, where it started with my own lived experience, and my focus has been on what happens afterwards. Because back to that earlier point, once it's happened, there's not a lot, if I'm honest. Specifically for suicide bereavement, apart from a few fantastic organisations, like charitable organisations, there's not a lot. It's quite a scattered sort of landscape. And whilst I haven't formulated life beyond into any kind of substance, it's very much a side project that's still very conceptual. The focus at the heart is very much to try and bring purpose, meaning, empathy, hope to people like me who have been bereaved. And when it comes to that, I've got huge empathy, and I can talk with great authority because I know what that is. I live it every day. But I'm thankfully, I've never reached a point in my life that my son Charlie did, to that place where I would be able to sort of sit in front of someone and say, I know how you feel, because I don't. Yeah. So not avoiding it, just that's my honest, answer.
No, thank you for being honest. I think it's really important, and thank you for pointing to the resources as well. So I've put it in the chat for those joining live. That's papyrus-uk.org.
That's right.
And there's also another charity called SOS Silence of Suicide, which also has a helpline. So Papyrus is more for young people, and SOS Silence of Suicide also covers, kind of the adults brand ages as well, range of ages. I did a charity walk at the weekend, 16 miles. It's a long way, legs are still hurting kind of, for SOS Silence of Suicide, as also September was, the 10th of September was World Suicide Prevention Day. And so I'm still, by the way, raising funds for them. So if after this, I'll put it in the comments of the video. If you're watching in a timely manner, you can still contribute. And yeah, obviously would be forever grateful for any support. So thank you so much, Mark, for being here and for being so open to talking about a topic that we often don't talk about, and definitely not enough, and for bringing Charlie into the room as well. That's been really special. So thank you so much. And we will carry on with questions in a minute for those who are here live. For those who are watching the recording, this is the end of the recording. So thank you for watching. Do join us live next time. In October, we have an episode on disability pride, changing the narrative. You can also follow on Instagram and Facebook at Be Beyond Borders, and you can subscribe to the newsletter on the website bebeyondborders.com. We have lots of episodes now to watch. If you've missed any of them, we are covering a wide range of topics around diversity and inclusion. Essentially, we're talking about things people don't usually talk about. So if you want to rewatch any of the previous episodes, then do find them on the YouTube channel, Be Beyond Borders. That's it for the recording. Thank you so much for those watching it, and see you soon.
Thank you.